Welcome to another episode of Diving Deep with Shalita and Kareem. We have some really interesting and hot topics to talk about today. So, what are we going to talk about today?
I guess true to the name of our channel, I guess at some point in time we have to dive deeper than current news events and things like that. And one of the things that we originally intended to talk about that we kind of put on the back burner for a little while was frequencies. Frequencies, a lot of people, talk, will say certain slogans like good vibrations and things like that. But kind of getting into what does that actually mean and how does that affect us mentally, psychologically, I should say, emotionally, and even physically, how these frequencies come into play. And it's a very, I would say it's a very wide range of applications when it comes down to it. So we're going to hit on a few things because we could literally be here for months. We could do a whole college semester instead of a video session on this topic. So one of the things that I wanted to get on first is something called Schumann resonances. And I want to get on that first because one of our very first videos, we talked about stress and how it affects the body, and how certain hormones or chemicals are released in the body that have certain effects. There are certain things that our body does in connection with the earth, and it's a big part of natural healing, or holistic healing, or as they would say in the East, acoustic healing, which is something we don't really hear in the West. And it's basically sound therapy, healing your body through sound. Schumann resonance was something that was discovered, some people say as early as the 1960s or 1950s, but it was truly discovered in the 1970s by a German biophysicist named Winfried Otto Schumann. And while he was a professor at this German college, one of the things that he gave his students a problem to solve, and it had to do with dimensions of the earth and things like that. And no one in the class was actually able to figure out this, the answer to his equation. So the professor figured it out himself, and he came up with the number 7.83. But he didn't come up with an equation like he thought he was going to come up with. He actually came up with a frequency. And this frequency, which became known as the Schumann resonance, is actually a frequency that is emitted from the crust of the earth, and it bounces off the ionosphere. So what you actually have is waves oscillating between the crust of the earth and the ionosphere, which is in the outer, not outer space, but it's so anyway, to get to the point of what it does, this frequency is what they call the heartbeat of the earth. This sound, or this frequency, you can't hear it, but this frequency, which is below our range of hearing, but it's when we think about frequency, we have to not just think about sound, because our ears can only hear a certain range of sound. Once you get above, I believe, about 15,000 hertz, we can't hear that anymore. There's a layer that after our hearing cuts out, certain animals like dogs can still hear, but we can't. And there's also on the other end of that spectrum, that's so low that we can't hear it. We can't hear it either. The oscillations are so low, or the waves are so low, that our ears just can't pick it up. So anyway, this frequency that comes out of the crust of the earth, he wanted to test what this frequency was. So what he did was he took a couple of students from his class who volunteered, and this college campus just happened to have an underground bunker. And he had an idea of what these frequencies did. So he took a couple of students and he put them in this underground bunker. And within 2 hours, he started to notice certain symptoms. Some of the students developed fevers, or their heart rate was lower than it was before. They started becoming fatigued. They started becoming, in longer periods of time, 6 hours, 8 hours, they started becoming sickly. After, there was one group who I believe stayed in this underground bunker for 72 hours. And after 72 hours of being under this bunker, underground, and not coming out at all for any reason, their bodies were literally breaking down, shutting down. Their organs were beginning to shut down. And as soon as he brought them back up above the surface of the ground or the crust of the earth, their body started rehabilitating, started recovering. So there's this frequency that literally comes out of the earth that heals our bodies. And this is our connection to the earth. When we're cut off from this frequency, that's when oxidation starts to develop in the body. That's when different things start to happen to, adverse effects, or as we say, disease. And so what happened is when they discovered this frequency, there's some mischief that started happening. In America, when they started putting up the telephone lines and things like that, or not telephone lines, but radio signal towers, they started putting up these towers, and they started realizing they kept getting this feedback in all of their equipment. They, put new equipment up, and they got this feedback in it, so they would scrap the equipment, buy all new equipment and things like that. And what they did not realize was that this Schumann resonance, this frequency of 7.83 hertz, was interfering with their equipment. So to bypass that roadblock, they jumped from 7.83 hertz all the way up to 50,000 hertz. And that's where our radio signals are broadcast at today, to get away from the Schumann resonance. Now, the problem with that is you have Schumann resonance, which is coming out of the earth, and then you have radio frequency, which is pushing against the Schumann resonance. And so in major cities, we have a whole lot of, I would say, we have a whole lot of sound, or I would say radiation pollution from these radio waves. And in the major city, more so than in the country, those Schumann resonances are suppressed. And that creates a breeding ground for a lot of debilitating effects in the body. Now, another thing when it comes down to the body and dealing with frequencies, another frequency that was very popular as far back as the days of Egypt is the frequency of 432 megahertz. And this frequency is the frequency that stringed instruments are naturally tuned to. In the Bible, there's a point in time where King David is told to create certain instruments. He creates a harp, he creates a lyre, he creates several string instruments. And ironically, these instruments are all tuned naturally to 432 hertz. And 432 hertz is a frequency that it has a antioxidant effect on the body. Remember, I said one of the problem with the Schumann resonances and us not being exposed to them is that it creates antioxidants. It creates oxidation in the body, right? So this 432 hertz frequency is an antioxidant. It stimulates antioxidant activity in the body by 100%. So it's basically a reversal of that radio pollution that we're getting in our bodies, right? So now it's ironic that the ancient Egyptians knew about this frequency. And not only the ancient Egyptians, the ancient Hebrews knew about it. David was told to create these string instruments, and then David also created the Psalms. Now, here's another neat thing about the Psalms in the Bible. In the Bible, there's 150 Psalms. Now, I have other books like this one here. I'm gonna, I don't know if you're gonna be able to show this. In this book, if you can see the writing on the page, do you see what psalm that says?
Psalms 23.
Right. So in this book, called The Other Bible. This book is a list of things. So when the Bible was being canonized, there were certain scrolls and certain writings that were rejected. And basically, this book is somewhat of a compilation of all the things that were rejected from the canon of the Bible. You see how thick that is. But in this book, they have a bunch of the other Psalms. Some of them they're accredited to David, but, which they're questionable and things like that. But in the Catholic Bible, there's also a few more Psalms than the Christian Bible has. The Essenes had certain Psalms that are not in the Bible. The Pharisees and all them, everybody had more Psalms than what was actually in the Bible. I've actually read, and I've seen a couple of them, that there was actually not 150 Psalms or 160 Psalms. There was actually 364 Psalms in total. That there was a Psalm for each day of the Jewish calendar or Hebrew calendar, which the Hebrew calendar is 364 days, not 365 like the Greco-Roman calendar. Now, I guess the neat point in that is the Psalms were supposed to be written in a way where if you've ever heard a Hebrew prayer, like, how it's sang in a certain tone and things like that, that tone, along with the words being spoken, were supposed to be a yearly tuning for your body. It was supposed to be certain words at a certain frequency that was supposed to have a certain effect on your body. That, in combination with the instruments that David played, was supposed to be a yearly tuning of your body. Now, half the Psalms got cut out, so we only get half of that tuning effect. So it's just, things like that. And it's also kind of neat to know that 432 hertz frequency is something that it didn't just die out in, the days of the ancient Hebrews or ancient Egypt. There are artists today who still record in 432 hertz. Bob Marley was one of them. Leonard Skinner, I believe, was another one. There's a few of them who specifically make sure their music is recorded in 432 hertz. And what happened a few decades back actually, is that the nationwide standard for radio frequency or sound recording got switched from 432 hertz to 440 hertz. And 440 hertz does not have the same effect on your body as 432 does. There are people who will make the argument that 440 hertz, when it comes down to the chakras, 440 hertz affects your heart and 432 affects your mind and things like that. But there are other people who make the argument that 440 hertz is harmful for your body, as opposed to 432, which stimulates healing. And it stimulates healing through it reduces stress, and also it promotes 100% antioxidant activity in your body. So those two things. So that's the neat thing about frequency and the Schumann resonance and the 432 hertz. Now getting into audio therapy, which was another thing that I brought up. In Eastern holistic medicine, or they, especially in Indian cultures, they actually heal through frequencies. If you ever seen people using the singing bowls with the wand, that what they're doing is frequency. If you ever seen in Buddhism, when they're doing the Om and they're chanting, it's a certain frequency where that Om is chanted or hummed at, and it promotes a certain vibration in the body. So they would heal through certain tones, because every organ in your body produces a certain frequency. And when there's sicknesses in the body, Dr. Sebi talked a lot about alkaline and acidic state in your body. But every organ in your body gives off a frequency, right? And so whenever that frequency is lower or raised, and and this is not how people talk about raising your vibration. That's not where I'm going at with this. Every organ has a particular frequency that it gives off, and when that frequency is altered in some way, that's when you start getting the breaking down of that organ. When you think about what alcohol does to the body, alcohol evaporates water. That's why when you get a hangover, what you actually have is extreme dehydration. So if you notice people who say they pregame, they drink water all day long, and then there's two different types of pregaming, but you drink water all day long, and then by the time you go out, the alcohol doesn't hit you right away, or it doesn't hit you as hard, or it doesn't stay with you as long throughout the night, because you have more water in your more water in your system. But if you were a person who didn't drink water all day long, and you just commonly don't drink water, then you go out and you take a couple sips of that first drink, and you're starting to feel buzzed already. Why? Because alcohol is doing its job. So when you get certain things like that, and the other thing also to remember is that your body supposedly is 70% water. There was a very neat experiment that was done, I believe, back in the 1970s by a Japanese scientist named Masaru Emoto. I think you've heard of him before, right?
I'm not sure.
Okay, so he had at this time in history, he had a theory, and he basically became a laughing stock because of his theory. His theory was that water was capable of having emotion. And so what he did was he took water.
Okay, I'm familiar with this.
Right, okay, good. So he took water, and he would expose the water to different things, or he would take water from different sources. So let's just say one of the things he did was he would take regular water, spring water, and he would expose the water to classical music, Mozart, Beethoven, Bach, and things like that. And he would flash freeze it. And then he would take that sample and he would look at it under a microscope. And what he would notice was that the water would form geometric shapes like snowflakes, and then he would take some of that same water from the same source, and he would expose it to something that was full of the, distortion and bass, like rock and roll or heavy metal. And he would flash freeze it, and he would see that the water no longer produced geometric shapes. It produced a blob with no defined edges. And so what he realized was that frequency had an effect on water. And since all of our whole emotional range is, there's a frequency that goes with each emotion, right? So if water was capable of being affected by frequency, and emotion has a frequency range to it, then he theorized that water would be capable of having an emotion. So he took water, and he would just say, things to the water. You're beautiful. I love you. You're needed. You're appreciated. Positive affirmations. The things that we do today, we can, and you'll see a lot of people doing it on Facebook and things like that. But it has a root of where it all came from, because somebody who, at his point in time when he proposed all these things, he was a laughing stock. But now we do it today, and it's just common knowledge. So he took this water, and he would say those positive things to it. And when he flash froze it and looked at it under the microscope, guess what? It produced the same positive or same geometric shapes as the classical music did. And so when he told the water sample, I hate you, you're ugly, I don't need you, I want you out of my life, things like that, it did the same thing that the heavy metal music did. It turned it into a blob. So he realized that, according to the laws of science, you must have something that is observable, something that is repeatable, and things like that. So he had a foundation to move forward.